The glass hit the marble floor of the Pemberton Club and shattered like a gunshot, and in the half-second of silence that followed, every head in the room turned, not toward the mess, not toward Raina, but toward the woman standing over her with a champagne flute, still raised in one manicured hand. "You stupid girl," Celeste Hargrove said, her voice the kind of quiet that carries further than screaming. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Raina Aldous was on her knees before she'd even registered hitting the floor. Her palms were pressing into broken crystal. One of them was already bleeding. The front of her white server's shirt was soaked in sparkling wine, and somewhere behind her, she could hear Malcolm, the banquet's supervisor, inhaling through his teeth the way he did right before he fired someone. But none of that mattered as much as the man sitting 6 feet away, completely still, watching. Sterling Vaux had not moved when the tray went down. He hadn't flinched at the sound, hadn't looked up from the folded napkin in front of him. He simply sat with his shoulders square and his hands flat on the table and watched the way a man watches something he expected. Celeste crouched down so her face was level with Raina's. The diamonds in her ears caught the candlelight. "You spilled an 09 crystal on my dress, and now you're bleeding on the floor and you still haven't apologized. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." "I'm sorry," Raina said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. "Miss Hargrove, I'm very sorry. Let me get something to clean." "Don't touch me." Celeste stood smoothing the front of her gown. "Malcolm, I want her gone. Tonight." Malcolm appeared at Raina's elbow, his face the color of old bread. "Of course, Miss Hargrove. Raina, if you could just—" She went to reach for her phone, a voice said. The room went quiet in a different way. Sterling Vaux had spoken. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. It was the kind of voice that made rooms rearrange themselves. "I beg your pardon?" Celeste turned. The server. Sterling's eyes moved to Raina just briefly, then back to Celeste. "You knocked her arm when you reached across the table. I watched it happen. She went to set the bottle down and you moved into her." Celeste laughed, a bright, sharp sound. "Darling, you can't be serious. I'm rarely anything else." He stood. He did it slowly, unhurried, the way men stand when they know the room will wait. He was tall. Raina hadn't noticed how tall from a distance. He had dark hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved to hold bad news. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things fit men who'd never once had to think about the price of something. "Malcolm," Sterling said, not looking at the supervisor. The lady's glass broke because she was jostled. That's the club's liability, not hers. If there's a dry cleaning bill for Miss Hargrove's dress, send it to my account. Malcolm made a small, strangled sound. "Yes, Mr. Vaux. Of course, as for letting her go." Sterling finally looked at Raina again, and this time the look stayed. "It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was the way you'd look at a calculation you were still running. I wouldn't." Celeste's face shifted through several expressions very quickly. She settled on something that looked like composure but wasn't. "Sterling, we're here to celebrate. Come and sit down. She's not worth the—" "The evening is over, Celeste." The 4 words dropped like stones. Celeste didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then she laughed again, smaller this time. "You can't be serious. My father expects. Your father's deal closed at 4 o'clock this afternoon." Sterling reached for his jacket on the back of the chair. "The dinner was a formality. We're done." "You're doing this over a waitress. I'm doing this," Sterling said, buttoning his jacket with 2 unhurried movements, "because I don't share meals with people who mistake cruelty for authority." He glanced toward Celeste once more. "It's a character problem, and character problems don't fix themselves." Celeste stood very still in the middle of the Pemberton Club's private dining room, with the remnants of a very expensive bottle of champagne soaking into the hem of her gown, and said nothing. Sterling walked around the table. He stopped in front of Raina, who was still on her knees picking up the larger pieces of broken crystal because no one had told her she could stop. "Leave it," he said. She looked up. Up close, he was even more difficult to read. His face gave away almost nothing, except for something in his eyes that wasn't pity. Pity she'd seen. This was something more unsettling. It looked like recognition. "I'm fine," she said, which was something she'd been saying so long it came out automatically. "Thank you for, I'm fine. Your hand is bleeding. It's not deep." He looked at her for another moment. Then he reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded white handkerchief. He held it out, not pressed to her palm, not wrapped with excessive care. Just held out the way you'd pass someone a pen. She took it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Raina." "Raina." He said it the same way he said everything else, without excess. "When your shift ends, come to the front entrance. I'll have someone take you to have that hand looked at." "That's really not. It's not a request," he said, and then he walked out of the room. Malcolm exhaled like a man who'd just survived something. He looked at Rayna with an expression caught somewhere between relief and resentment. "You can finish your shift," he said, and walked away before she could say thank you. Rayna stayed on her knees for another moment. The Pemberton Club's dining room hummed back to life around her. The low murmur of conversation, the clink of crystal, the jazz quartet starting up again in the corner. Celeste had already disappeared, escorted out by a friend in a blue gown, who was rubbing her back and saying something sharp and consoling. Rayna pressed the white handkerchief against her palm. She thought about the look on Sterling Vaux's face, the way he had said her name, the way he'd known exactly when she'd been jostled and hadn't bothered to mention it until it mattered. She thought, he was watching me before any of this happened. The thought should have been reassuring. It wasn't. The car that met her at the front entrance at 11:15 was not a taxi. It was a black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who introduced himself as Gareth and said nothing after that. The interior smelled like leather and the faint ghost of expensive cologne. Sterling Vaux was already inside. Rayna hesitated at the open door. "I thought you meant—" "Get in, Rayna." She got in because she was 27 years old and she had been saying yes to things she didn't have the energy to argue with for the past 2 years. And also because the alternative was the 40-minute bus ride home with a bleeding hand and a wet shirt in November. The door closed. The car moved. She held the bundled handkerchief tighter. "I looked up your HR file," Sterling said without preamble. She turned her head. "I'm sorry. I'm on the board of the Pemberton's parent company. I have access to staff records." He didn't say this apologetically. He said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. "You've been working there 14 months. You pick up extra shifts when they're offered. You have no commendations, but also no complaints." He paused. "Until tonight. That wasn't. I know what it was. I told you that already." He glanced at her hand. "The clinic we're going to is a private practice. The doctor is expecting us." "You called ahead." "I called ahead." Looked out the window. Toronto moved past in ribbons of wet light, the streets slick from an earlier rain. They were heading downtown, but not toward any hospital she recognized. "Mr. Vaux," she said. "Sterling, Mr. Vaux, I appreciate what you did tonight. Genuinely. But I've learned that when someone does something like that and then puts me in their car, there's usually—" She looked for the diplomatic version, an expectation attached. Something shifted in his expression. She caught it in the dark reflection of the window more than on his actual face. "You're right that there's something I want, but not what you're thinking." "Then what?" He turned to look at her directly. His eyes were a dark grey-green, and they had a quality of absolute steadiness that made her feel like a document being read. "I've been watching you work for 3 weeks," he said. "Not following you. I have dinner at the Pemberton on Thursdays. You're on the floor on Thursdays." A pause. 2 weeks ago, you dropped a full tray on the service stairs. You caught it before anything hit the ground. You checked if anyone had seen you before you checked your own wrist. Rayna's throat tightened. She had a hairline fracture in that wrist from 6 months ago that hadn't healed properly. She still didn't know how he could have seen that. "You check your phone every 12 minutes, Sterling continued. "You do the math on your tips the second you get a free moment. You're not doing it because you like numbers. You're doing it because you're calculating something." He looked at her steadily. "What are you calculating, Rayna? I don't think that's your business." "It might become my business," he said. "That's what I'm trying to decide." The car stopped in front of a building on University Avenue that looked more like a renovated Victorian townhouse than a medical office. Warm light came through the front windows. A plaque by the door read Reston Private Health. The driver opened her door without being asked. The doctor's name was Dr. Holloway, and she treated Rayna's palm with the kind of focused, quiet competence that made Rayna think of how she imagined things could be. The appointment without a wait, the room without peeling ceiling tiles, the bandage that was applied with actual gentleness. Sterling stood by the door the entire time with his arms crossed. He didn't look at his phone. He looked at the doctor's hands, then at Rayna's face when she winced, then at the doctor's hands again. "You'll want to keep it dry for 48 hours, Dr. Holloway said, applying the last strip of tape. "Change the dressing tomorrow morning. If there's any swelling or heat, come back." "Thank you," Rayna said. The doctor looked briefly at Sterling. "Should I?" "Yes," he said. The usual account. When they were back in the car, Rayna sat with her newly wrapped hand in her lap and looked at the way the bandage gleamed white in the dark. Clean and careful. Things were so rarely clean and careful. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." Sterling was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city had shifted into its late-night register. Fewer cars, more silence, the yellow cast of streetlights instead of neon. "Because I've been watching someone carry something too heavy for too long," he said, "and I find that more interesting than most things. Interesting isn't a reason. It's the only reason I do anything. He turned to her. Where do you live? She gave him the address. She watched his face for the flicker of judgment that came when you told someone you lived in Scarborough. The almost invisible recalibration, the tiny adjustment. It didn't come. Tell me about the person you're working 4 shifts a week for, he said. Her whole body went cold. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. His voice wasn't unkind. It was just precise. You're not working 14 months of double shifts because you enjoy it, Raina. Who is it? She turned to look out the window. The highway was rising now, the city spreading out below them in a grid of lights. My sister, she said finally, half-sister, she's 9, her name is Bria. She didn't say anything else. He waited. Her mother, my father's second wife, she left. 8 months ago. There was no custody arrangement, no warning, she just left. Raina pressed her good hand flat against her knee. Bria has a congenital heart condition. She needs a procedure. It's not emergency surgery, but it's not elective either, and the wait time on the public system is 15 months minimum. The private clinic can do it in 6 weeks if we pay out of pocket. She paused. It's $42,000. The number tasted like what it was. Impossible. I've been saving, she said. I have 11. I thought I could get a loan, but my credit isn't. She stopped. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Because I asked, Sterling said. And because you've been carrying it alone, and no one asks. She looked at him. The city lights moved across his profile in slow intervals. He had the face of someone who had made a great many decisions in his life and regretted very few of them. What do you do exactly? She asked. Everyone at the Pemberton treats you like you could have them fired with a text message. I could, he said simply. I run a private investment firm. Vo Capital, we manage infrastructure contracts, mostly. Buildings, transit, communications. Things the city can't run without. He paused. I'm also the majority shareholder of a defense technology company, 2 hotel chains, and a shipping operation that has nothing to do with shipping. Raina stared at him. That last part, you don't need to know that part. And the part where you pulled up my HR file and have been watching me for 3 weeks. That part, Sterling said, is relevant to what I need to discuss with you. The SUV was slowing. She recognized her street, the rows of semi-detached houses, the corner store with the hand-painted sign, the yellow glow of Bria's nightlight in the second-floor window. She had left Bria with Mrs. Kowalski next door, who charged $20 a night and always smelled like menthol and never asked questions. Sterling looked at the building, not with the pity people sometimes showed, with the same steadiness he showed everything. She's up there, Raina said without meaning to. I know. She turned sharply. What? The nightlight, he said. You looked at the window first. Before the building, before the door. The nightlight. Raina exhaled. What do you want, Mr. Vo? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a matte black card. No logo, just a number in silver. I need something from you, he said. Something that has nothing to do with your job at the Pemberton, and everything to do with the fact that you're someone who doesn't already know who I am. I know who you are. You know what I am, he corrected. That's different. You're not impressed. You're not afraid. You're calculating, same as you always are, whether I'm an asset or a liability. Something in his expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but changed. That makes you the most useful person I've spoken to in 8 months. Useful for what? He was quiet for a moment. Then, are you familiar with the name Hargrove? Celeste's father, Gordon Hargrove. He's a developer. He's a developer who has been using my firm's infrastructure contracts to launder money through a series of holding companies for the past 4 years. Sterling said it without heat, the way you'd describe the weather. I have evidence. I've been building a case for the better part of 2 years. The problem is that Celeste and I have been photographed together 8 times, attended 4 galas. Our names have been in the same sentence in enough columns that my legal team believes any evidence I bring forward will be challenged as personally motivated. You need someone who has no connection to any of it. I need someone who can stand next to me publicly for the next 3 months, he said. Attend events. Be seen. Make it clear that Celeste Hargrove was a professional arrangement and that I have moved on, and that therefore my motivations in pursuing this case are exactly what they appear to be, that I simply don't like criminals. The silence in the car was very complete. You want me to pretend to be your partner, Raina said. I want you to be, for all visible purposes, the woman I've chosen. Yes, I'm a waitress. You're a woman with a good mind and no patience for nonsense, which is significantly rarer than you'd think in the circles I move in. Raina looked at the card in his hand, and in exchange, it wasn't a question. He answered it anyway. Bria's procedure is paid for, all of it. I'll also clear the medical debt your household has accumulated over the past 18 months. I've already looked at the file. The collection agency that holds your current balance is a subsidiary of a company I'm about to acquire, and I will arrange for a health insurance policy that covers her ongoing care until she turns 18. Raina's breath left her body. Why, she said when she could speak again. Why not hire an actress? Someone who knows how to, because an actress performs, Sterling said. And performance is detectable. What I need is someone who is genuinely surprised by things, someone who has genuine reactions, someone who looks at me the way you're looking at me right now. Like you're deciding whether I'm worth trusting, because that is a look no one in my life has given me in a very long time, and it's the only look that reads as real. He held the card out. She looked at it, at the number, at his hand, at the silver catching the light from the street. I need to sleep on it, she said. Of course. The driver opened her door. Raina stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk in her damp server's uniform with her bandaged hand and his card pressed between her fingers. Raina, Sterling said. She turned. Check on her, he said. Then sleep. And in the morning, if you decide yes, call that number before 8. A pause. If you decide no, I'll have the Pemberton informed that tonight's incident was entirely the club's liability, and your position will be secure. You owe me nothing either way. She stood on the sidewalk long after the black SUV had disappeared around the corner. The November air came in off the lake, cold and damp, smelling of rain that hadn't fallen yet. She went inside. She checked on Bria first. Bria was asleep on her side with her arm around a stuffed rabbit named Gerald, her breathing the slow and careful breathing of someone whose heart had to work harder than it should, to do what hearts were supposed to do easily. She was 9 years old, and she had her mother's nose and their father's stubbornness, and a scar on her chest from a procedure at age 2 that Raina had held her through in a hospital waiting room while she was 25 and absolutely terrified. Raina sat on the edge of the bed and watched her breathe for a long time. Then she went to the kitchen and spread the collection notices across the table under the fluorescent light. They made a kind of map of the past 2 years, the specialist appointments, the medication adjustments, the 1 month she'd been short and had chosen rent over a refill prescription and had spent 6 days telling herself it would be fine. She turned the card over in her unbandaged hand, Sterling Vaux. She thought about the way he'd said, character problems don't fix themselves, the way he'd put himself between Celeste Hargrove and a woman he didn't know, without theatre, without making it about himself. The way he'd stood in the corner of that medical office, watching the doctor's hands as if he'd personally assigned himself the task of making sure nothing went wrong. She thought about what Bria had said last week, pressing her face into Raina's shoulder. When do I get to stop being scared, Ray? She didn't let herself think too long. She'd learned that thinking too long was a luxury she didn't have. She dialed at 7:58 in the morning. He picked up on the first ring. Yes, a brief pause. A car will be there at 9. Pack 3 days of clothes, you and Bria both. She'll be seen by a cardiac specialist at St. Brendan's Private at 10:30. Raina's hand tightened on the phone. You booked the appointment already. I booked it last night, Sterling said, when you took the card instead of leaving it in the car. She stood in her kitchen with the collection notices still spread across the table and the first grey light of morning coming through the window above the sink, and she thought, this man has been 3 steps ahead of every moment since I met him. She didn't know if that was the most frightening thing she'd ever encountered or the first time she'd felt safe in 2 years. Maybe both. We'll be ready, she said. The car that arrived was not the SUV. It was something smaller, quieter, still black, still expensive, but less conspicuous. The driver's name was Fenn, and unlike Gareth, she said good morning when Bria climbed in with Gerald under her arm and looked at the leather interior with enormous eyes. Is this a limo? Bria whispered. No, Raina said. It smells like a limo. You've never been in a limo. I've seen them on TV. Bria pressed her nose against the window. Where are we going? To see a doctor. Bria's face went carefully neutral the way it did when she was trying not to be afraid. She had learned that expression young. A good doctor? She asked. Yes, Raina said. A very good doctor. St. Brendan's Private looked the way the Reston Clinic had looked. Like someone had taken all the things that were hard and painful about healthcare and decided they didn't have to be just for this one building. The receptionist knew Bria's name. The waiting room had a corner with actual good toys, not the broken ones. The pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Osi Mensah, had warm hands and explained everything twice without being asked. Sterling was not there. That surprised her, somehow. She had expected him to be there. She wasn't sure how she felt about the fact that he wasn't. There was a text on her phone at 11 o'clock. How is she? Raina sat in the hallway outside the examination room and typed back. Doctor says the procedure can be scheduled for 3 weeks. She's good. She asked if the hospital had a gift shop. A pause. Then, it does. 3rd floor. They have a section with stuffed animals. Raina stared at her phone. He had already been here, had already walked this building. had already noted where the gift shop was. She didn't know what to do with that. Sterling's building was on Bay Street, 52 floors of black glass that caught the sky and held it. The lobby had security that didn't look like security. Men and women in dark suits who moved like they were always thinking about the door. Fen walked Raina through with a brief nod that apparently meant something, because no one asked her to sign in. The elevator required a keycard. The offices on the top floor were spare and cold and enormous, with windows that looked out over the lake as if the city were something the building was surveying rather than part of. Sterling was behind a desk made from something dark and probably worth more than her car. He was on a call, speaking in French too rapid for her schoolgirl vocabulary to follow, and he pointed to the chair across from him without looking up. She sat. She waited the call ended. He set the phone down. He looked at her. "How is she?" "Good," Raina said. "Nervous. O.C. Mensa thinks 3 weeks." Something moved through his expression quickly and was gone. "Good." He slid a folder across the desk. She opened it. The words at the top read Partnership and Co-Representation Agreement. She read it, all of it. He waited without impatience or performance, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he existed. The document was detailed. She would be present at a minimum of 8 public events over a 12-week period. She would reside in his secondary residence on Rosedale Valley Road. A house, not an apartment, which was not something she'd been expecting. She was not to discuss the nature of their arrangement with anyone. She was not to contact any member of the Hargrove family or their associates. She was to represent herself in all public contexts as his partner. There was also a clause she read 3 times. Party B retains full personal autonomy. No physical intimacy is required or implied. Party A agrees that all decisions regarding Party B's personal conduct outside of agreed public appearances are at Party B's sole discretion. She looked up. "You put that in yourself," she said. "Yes. Why?" Sterling looked at her with the same absolute steadiness he'd had from the beginning. "Because you were going to ask," he said, "and I'd rather you read it in a legal document than wonder about it for 12 weeks. Raina set the folder back on the desk. "I have conditions," she said. Something shifted in his eyes, not surprise. More like satisfaction. "Go on. Bria comes with me. She's not staying alone, and I'm not paying Mrs. Kowalski for 3 months. There's a room for her already in the Rosedale house, I assumed. She had not been expecting that either. She kept her face even. I keep my shifts at the Pemberton for the first month, until I'm sure this is real and not something that disappears when it's inconvenient fare. And I need to understand what I'm actually walking into. The Hargrove case, the evidence, what the risk is." Sterling was quiet for a moment. "The risk," he said carefully, "is that Gordon Hargrove has been operating in this city for 30 years and has significant influence over people who owe him. When this case becomes public, and it will, there will be a period of approximately 6 to 8 weeks where being associated with me will be uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," she repeated. "Potentially more than that," he said. "I want to be honest with you." That's the first time anyone's said that to me in quite a while. His jaw moved. "I'm told I lead with it too late, usually. How late?" "Generally after the problem has already happened." Raina picked up the pen on the desk. It was heavier than pens had any right to be. "I'm not doing this because I think you're a good person," she said. "I'm doing this because Bria needs that procedure and because the math works. I know, and I'll be watching. If anything feels wrong, you'll leave," he said. "And the agreement holds regardless. Bria's care is separate from your participation. That is not a leverage point. I want that to be very clear." She believed him. She was not entirely sure why. She signed. She told Bria they were going to stay at a friend's house for a while. Bria asked if the friend had a dog. Sterling, when texted this question by Raina while she was packing, responded after a 2-minute silence with, "There is no dog. There could be a dog." She had not been expecting that. "Don't get a dog," she wrote back. "Understood," he replied. And then after a pause, "There is, however, a very established garden snail in the back garden that Fen has named Derek." Raina sat on the edge of Bria's bed with her phone in her hand and laughed. A real one, the kind that caught her off guard. She hadn't done that in longer than she could remember. The Rosedale house was a narrow Victorian on a street lined with maple trees, whose leaves were going amber and red in the November cold. It had a blue door and high ceilings, and a kitchen that smelled like someone had just baked bread, though there was no one there when they arrived. Bria walked through each room with Gerald under her arm and a running commentary of observations. The room that turned out to be hers had a window seat with a cushion in the exact shade of green that Bria had declared, 3 years ago, to be her favorite color. Raina stood in the doorway watching her half-sister run her fingers along the cushion's edge and tried to figure out how he had known that. She couldn't. She filed it away under things about Sterling Vaux I don't yet have an answer for. which was becoming a long list. She found him in the study on the ground floor that evening, behind a smaller desk, reading something in a language that was neither French nor English. He looked up when she knocked on the open door. "Everything all right?" he asked. "She likes the room," Raina said. "Good." She came in and sat in the chair across from him. "I want to ask you something and I want a real answer." "All right. Why Celeste? If you knew what her father was, why were you ever in a position where your association with her was a problem?" Sterling set down what he was reading. "Because," he said, and then paused in a way that didn't feel evasive, just careful. "When you're building a case against someone, proximity to their family is sometimes a necessary part of the process. I needed access to certain information. Celeste was access." He paused again. "It's not something I'm proud of, but you did it anyway." "Yes, and when she slapped a server and you ended it, was that always the plan? Were you waiting for a reason?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I was going to end it the following week regardless. The case is far enough along." "But what happened tonight?" he stopped. "What? It wasn't strategic," he said. "I want to be clear about that. What happened with you tonight wasn't a calculation. The calculation came after." He held her gaze. "The moment itself was simply that I saw something happen that shouldn't have happened, and I said so." Raina looked at him in the dim lamplight of the study. The city outside the windows was settling into its nighttime register. Somewhere upstairs she could hear Bria's footsteps crossing the floor of the green-cushioned room. She was in the house of a man who moved money around like weather, who had spent years building a case against a criminal while sitting next to that criminal's daughter at dinner, who had noticed her checking her phone every 12 minutes from across a restaurant floor for 3 weeks. She didn't trust him. She didn't distrust him. She was doing what she always did, watching, calculating, deciding. And somewhere in the very small and carefully guarded place where she kept the things she admitted only to herself, she noticed that he was doing the same thing. There was a sound from the hallway, small feet on hardwood. Bria appeared in the doorway in her pajamas with Gerald and looked at Sterling with the frank assessment of a 9-year-old with excellent instincts. "Fen says there's a snail in the garden," Bria said. "There is," Sterling confirmed. "What's its name, Derek?" Bria considered this with great seriousness. "That's a good name for a snail," she said finally, and padded back upstairs. Sterling watched the empty doorway for a moment after she was gone. Raina watched him watch it. "She's going to be okay," she said, and she wasn't entirely sure which of them she was saying it for. Sterling looked at her. In the quiet of the study, with the November dark pressing against the windows, his face was almost readable. "Yes," he said. "She is." Raina went to bed that night, in a room that was too clean and too quiet in a house that wasn't hers, with a contract signed in her name in a bandaged hand and a sister sleeping down the hall for the first time in months without the sound of the neighbors' arguments coming through the wall. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around her. She had made a deal with a man who kept secrets for a living and watched people across rooms, and had already known about Derek the snail before she arrived, which meant he'd been here recently, which meant he thought about the details. She had made a deal with a man who had told her to check on Bria before she called, who had put the autonomy clause in the contract without being asked, who had looked at her half-sister's footsteps disappearing upstairs with an expression she hadn't had enough time to identify. She was not safe. She was not in danger. She was somewhere in between, which was, she reflected, roughly where she'd been living for the past 2 years. The difference was that this time she hadn't arrived here alone. She closed her eyes. Down the hall a door creaked, Bria rolling over in her sleep. Raina counted the seconds until the house went quiet again. 6 seconds. She breathed. There was a shadow on the stairs that night that wasn't Bria, and it wasn't Fen. It stood outside Raina's door for a long moment, then moved away without a sound. She didn't hear it. But in the morning, when she came downstairs at 6:45, there was a cup of tea on the kitchen counter, still warm, made exactly the way she took it. Strong, no sugar, though she had never told anyone in this house how she drank her tea. She stood in the kitchen in her socked feet with the cup in her bandaged hand and looked at it for a long time. Sterling Vaux was 3 steps ahead of every moment. The question she hadn't answered yet, the one she'd been running the numbers on since the SUV had pulled away from her street last night, was whether that was something she was walking into or something she was already inside.